Hi, I'm Eliza. 3 weeks ago, I walked into the family office to sign some quarterly paperwork. The desk where my father usually sat was occupied by a stranger in an expensive suit. "Who are you?" I asked. The man smiled thinly and said, "The new co-owner of Meridian Orchards." My father stood in the doorway, not meeting my eyes when he mumbled, "We sold your half of the business to the Blackwell Group. We needed capital for your brother's tech startup. They sold my inheritance, a century of family legacy, like it was a used car. What they didn't realize was that the deed to the 80 acres underneath the orchards still had my name on it. And what they never saw coming was what I'd do next. Before, we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tuesday afternoons in the Willamette Valley always carried a certain stillness. Early October, when the apple harvest was reaching its peak and the air smelled like cider and woodsmoke. I'd returned to my apartment after teaching my botany seminar at Portland State, kicking off my sensible shoes and making a cup of tea when my phone buzzed. Dad asking me to come by the orchard office to sign some paperwork. Routine quarterly stuff, he said. Nothing urgent, but it needed my signature. The family business, Meridian Orchards, had been my grandparents' legacy. When they passed, it split between my father and his sister, my Aunt Lydia. When Lydia died 2 years ago, her half went to me, the only family member who'd studied agricultural science and actually worked the land during summers home from college. My father kept his half, and we had what I thought was a comfortable arrangement. I managed the orchard operations while also teaching, and he handled the business side. Accounts, sales contracts, taxes. I drove the 40 minutes from Portland with the windows down, watching the hills roll by, golden with autumn. Our 100-year-old apple trees standing in perfect rows like aged sentinels. The land itself had been in the family even longer. Bought by my great-grandfather in 1918 when he returned from the war. He'd wanted something solid beneath his feet after seeing so much destruction. The business office sat at the front of the property, a converted farmhouse with white clapboard siding and green shutters. When I walked in, the first thing I noticed was the unfamiliar cologne in the air. Something expensive and synthetic that clashed with the natural apple scent that usually filled the space. The second thing I noticed was the stranger sitting at my father's desk. Tall, perfectly tailored suit, a watch that probably cost more than my car. He looked up and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked, like I was a customer who'd wandered in. "Who are you?" I replied, my hand still on the doorknob. "Daniel Blackwell, Blackwell Group." He extended his hand. I didn't take it. "And you must be Eliza." My father appeared in the doorway behind me, and I turned. His face was gray, eyes not quite meeting mine. "Dad? What's going on?" He cleared his throat. "Eliza, we've made some changes to the business structure." "What changes?" The room suddenly felt colder. "We sold your half of Meridian to the Blackwell Group," he said, his voice flat, practiced. "They're expanding their agricultural portfolio." I stared at him, waiting for more, waiting for this to make sense. "My half? You sold my half of the business? You can't do that." "Actually," the stranger, Daniel, interjected, "the paperwork was finalized yesterday. Your father had power of attorney." "Power of attorney?" I nearly choked on the words. "From when? I never signed anything like that." My father shifted uncomfortably. "From when you were in graduate school, remember? You were going abroad." "For that research program in Chile. It was just in case something happened while you were away." "That was 7 years ago," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "It was temporary, for 6 months." "We never formally dissolved it," he mumbled. I felt dizzy, placing my hand on the wall to steady myself. "Why?" Why would you sell my share without even talking to me? My father looked toward Daniel, who seemed to take it as a cue to leave. I'll give you two a moment, he said smoothly, stepping out onto the porch. Once the door closed, my father sighed heavily. Your brother needs capital for his startup. It's about to go public, but they needed one more round of funding. This was the cleanest way to get it. Zach's startup? I repeated, disbelieving. The one that's pivoted what, 4 times now? From meal delivery to crypto to whatever it is this month? It's a tech incubator now, he said defensively, and it's going to be huge. The Blackwell Group offered full market value for your share. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It wasn't yours to sell. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. This was Aunt Lydia's legacy to me. She wanted me to have it because I'm the only one who cares about this land. It's just business, Eliza, he said, suddenly cold. The money's been transferred to an account in your name, almost $2 million. You should be grateful. What were you going to do with half an orchard anyway? Keep teaching and playing farmer on the weekends? The dismissal in his tone cut deeper than the betrayal itself. Playing farmer. Like the 5 years I'd spent modernizing irrigation systems, researching heritage varieties, and building our organic certification program meant nothing. Like my agricultural science degree was a hobby, not a career. Where's Mom? I asked, suddenly realizing her absence. At home. She agrees this is for the best. Zach's opportunity is once in a lifetime. The orchard business is stable, predictable. Stable. Right. I took a deep breath. And the land? The property itself? Something flickered across my father's face. Uncertainty? Guilt? That's part of the business, of course. I almost laughed. Almost. No, Dad, it's not. The business is Meridian Orchards, Inc. The land is separate. Always has been. Grandpa set it up that way for tax purposes, remember? The corporation leases the land from the family trust. His expression changed as realization dawned. That's just a technicality. The Blackwells understand they're buying the orchards, the business, everything. Did you actually check the land deed, Dad, after Aunt Lydia died? Because I did. Her half of the land transferred directly to me, outside of the business. It wasn't hers to put into the business, and it's not yours to sell. My father's face drained of color. He was a business administrator, not a lawyer, and clearly hadn't thought to check this detail. You can't do this, he said finally. Do what? Remind you that you just sold something that wasn't entirely yours to sell? I felt a strange calm settling over me. I need to go. I need to think. Eliza, wait! I was already walking out the door, past Daniel Blackwell, who was on his phone, past the office where generations of my family had run this business, past the little corner desk where I'd done homework as a child, while my grandfather showed me how to calculate crop yields. In my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, I realized I hadn't cried. There was no room for tears yet, just a hollow feeling and the beginnings of something harder forming underneath. I drove back to Portland in silence. No music, no open windows now. Just the sound of my own breathing and the question repeating, how do you sell someone else's inheritance without even asking? My apartment felt smaller than usual that night. A 1-bedroom in southeast Portland, filled with plants and books and artifacts from my research trips. Not fancy, but it was mine. I'd chosen to live modestly, putting most of my orchard income back into improving the business. My father had always made comments about my humble living situation, never understanding that it was a choice, not a limitation. I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was search for information about the Blackwell Group. a family-owned investment firm specializing in agricultural acquisitions. They'd been buying up small farms and orchards across Oregon and Washington for the past decade, consolidating them into large industrial operations, efficient, profitable, and completely soulless. Next, I pulled up the county property records website. I needed to confirm what I already knew, needed to see it in black and white. There it was, 80 acres in the Willamette Valley, co-owned by Robert Meridian and Eliza Meridian. My name, right there on the deed. The business might have been sold out from under me, but the land, the actual earth that my family had tended for generations, that was still half mine. My phone buzzed with texts from my father. "We need to talk about this. The Blackwells expect full ownership. Don't make this difficult." I put the phone face down without responding. Around midnight, as I was finally drifting to sleep, another message came through. This one from my brother, Zach. "Hey sis, heard about the orchard. Thanks for the investment in my future. I'll make it worth it. Promise." I stared at the screen, at his casual gratitude for something I never gave. Like I'd handed him my inheritance as a gift, not had it taken without my consent. The audacity was breathtaking. I typed back, "I didn't invest in anything. They sold my half without asking me." His reply came quickly, "Oh, well, it's going to be a huge success. I'll make sure you get a return on it." I turned off my phone. Completely. Wednesday morning dawned gray and drizzly, typical October in Oregon. I called in sick to my department, something I never did, and drove to the county clerk's office when it opened. I needed physical copies of everything, the land deed, the business incorporation documents, the trust that held the property. I needed to understand exactly where I stood legally. The clerk, an older woman with kind eyes, helped me gather the files. "Research project?" she asked conversationally. "Something like that," I replied, not ready to explain that my family had just shattered around me. Back in my car, I read through each document carefully. The land had indeed been kept separate from the business, a decision made by my grandfather in the 1950s that had probably seemed like mere tax planning at the time. Now it was my only leverage. Next, I drove to see Marion Chen, my aunt's attorney, who had handled her estate. Her office was in downtown Portland, a small practice specializing in estate law and agricultural business. "Eliza," she said when I walked in, "this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" I laid out the situation as calmly as I could. Marion listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. "So," she said when I finished, "they sold your share of the business using an expired power of attorney without consulting you, and now the new owners believe they've purchased rights to land that wasn't included in the sale." "That's about it," I confirmed. She shook her head slowly. "There are multiple legal issues here. The power of attorney should have been terminated after your return from Chile. Using it 7 years later is highly questionable. As for the land, you're correct. Your aunt's will specifically left her portion of the land directly to you, outside of the business assets." "What do I do?" I asked. "What do you want to do?" she countered. "We could challenge the business sale itself on the grounds of the improper use of the power of attorney. That would be a lengthy battle, though." I thought about it, staring out her window at the rainy Portland skyline. "No," I said finally. "Let them have the business. But I need to protect the land." Marion nodded. "In that case, I suggest we send formal notification to both your father and the Blackwell Group, clarifying the ownership status of the property. They'll need to negotiate a lease agreement with you if they want to continue operating on that land. And if they refuse," she gave me a small, tight smile, "then they've just purchased a fruit business with nowhere to grow fruit." Something cold and determined settled in my chest. "Draft the letters," I said. As I left Marion's office, my phone buzzed again. My mother this time, asking me to come to dinner that night. "We need to talk as a family," her text read. I hesitated, then agreed. I needed to face them directly anyway. The family home was a craftsman-style house in the West Hills, purchased with orchard profits in the 1990s. I'd grown up there, but now it felt like entering foreign territory. My mother opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a stiff hug. "Eliza, thank you for coming," she said, her voice overly bright. "Your father feels terrible about how things happened yesterday." "Does he?" I asked, stepping past her into the foyer. The dining room was set formally, like it was a holiday instead of a family crisis. My father sat at the head of the table, looking older than he had yesterday. My brother Zach was there too, scrolling through his phone until my mother cleared her throat. "Glad you could make it, sis," he said, as if this were a casual Sunday dinner. I sat down silently, waiting. My father cleared his throat. "Eliza, I want to apologize for how yesterday unfolded. We should have discussed this with you before finalizing anything." I noticed he was apologizing for the method, not the action itself. Classic. "Yes, you should have," I replied evenly. "That said," he continued, "what's done is done. The Blackwell Group is a respected firm. They'll maintain the orchard's legacy while bringing in modern efficiency. And the capital from the sale is going to launch Zach's company to the next level." "Tell her about the IPO projections," my mother encouraged, beaming at my brother. Zach leaned forward eagerly. "We're looking at a valuation of potentially $200 million within 2 years. The algorithms we're developing for startup incubation are revolutionary. Your orchard share could multiply 10 times over." "My orchard share," I repeated slowly. "The half of a century-old family business that was sold without my knowledge or consent." The table fell silent. My mother fidgeted with her napkin. "There's something you all should know," I said finally. "I visited the county clerk today, and Marion Chen." My father's expression hardened. "Lydia's lawyer? What for?" "To confirm what I already knew. You sold my share of the business, but the land, the actual property the orchards stand on, that's still half mine. Aunt Lydia left it to me directly, outside of the business assets." My father's face flushed red. "That's a technicality. The Blackwells purchased the entire operation." "No," I countered. "They purchased the business entity. The land is leased to the business by the family trust, and I own half that trust now." "So, what are you saying?" my mother asked, her voice rising slightly. "You're going to cause problems? Over a detail?" "A detail?" I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "It's 80 acres of prime Willamette Valley farmland. Land our family has owned for over 100 years. Land I've worked and studied and improved. That's not a detail, Mom." "Don't be difficult, Eliza," my father said, his tone shifting to the one he'd used when I was a defiant teenager. "The Blackwells will contest this. They have lawyers, resources." "So do I," I replied calmly. "Marion is drafting notifications as we speak. The Blackwell Group will need to negotiate a proper lease agreement with me if they want to continue using my land." "You would do that to your brother?" My mother gasped. "Risk his entire future?" I turned to Zach, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'm not doing anything to him. I'm protecting what's mine, what was left to me." "This is about the orchard," my father said dismissively. "You and your sentimental attachment to those trees. It's just land, Eliza. Just business." "No," I said, standing up. "It's not just land. It's not just business. It's legacy and responsibility and trust. Things that apparently don't mean much in this family anymore." I walked out before my entree was served, my mother calling after me, my father silent. As I drove back to my apartment, the rain had stopped, and a strange sense of clarity washed over me. I wasn't just fighting for land. I was fighting for recognition, for the value of the work I'd done, for my aunt's wish that the land she loved would be cared for properly. Back home, I opened my laptop again and began to research in earnest. Agricultural land trusts, conservation easements, sustainable farming practices. If half the orchard land was mine, I needed to decide what to do with it. Around midnight, I finally checked my phone again. 5 missed calls from my mother, 2 from my father, and 1 text message from an unknown number. Ms. Meridian, this is Daniel Blackwell. I understand there's been a misunderstanding about the land ownership. Perhaps we could meet to discuss this directly without lawyers complicating matters. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Mr. Blackwell, there's no misunderstanding. I own half the land your business now operates on. My attorney will be in touch regarding lease terms. I'm not interested in selling. I slept better that night than I had any right to. The next morning, Thursday, Marion called to tell me she'd sent the formal notifications. Expect some pushback, she warned. The Blackwells didn't become successful by giving in easily. I thanked her and headed to campus. Teaching my botany seminar was a welcome distraction, focusing on something I understood, something that followed predictable patterns unlike my family. After class, I found 3 voice messages waiting. 1 from my father, 1 from Daniel Blackwell, and surprisingly, 1 from my brother. I listened to Zach's first. "Hey, Lizzie," he began, using my childhood nickname. "This is getting out of hand. Dad's furious, Mom's crying, and the Blackwells are threatening to back out completely. Look, I know you're upset about not being consulted, but this opportunity is massive. My company could change everything for this family. I'll cut you in for 5% of my founder's shares. That's potentially millions. Just don't mess this up, okay? For the family." I deleted it without responding. My father's message was shorter and colder. "Eliza, this behavior is childish and destructive. The Blackwells purchased Meridian Orchards in good faith. If you persist with these land ownership claims, you'll not only damage your brother's future, but destroy our family's reputation in the business community. I raised you better than this." The final message from Daniel Blackwell was different in tone. "Ms. Meridian, I understand your attachment to the family property. I come from an agricultural background myself. The Blackwell Group prides itself on preserving the character of the operations we acquire. I'd like to meet with you personally to discuss how we might honor your family's legacy while moving forward with our business plans. Please call me at your convenience." His voice was smooth, reasonable, practiced. I had no doubt he'd delivered similar speeches to dozens of family farms before absorbing them into his corporate portfolio. I didn't return any of the calls. Instead, I spent the evening drafting a proposal of my own. If the Blackwells wanted to lease my half of the land, they would need to agree to very specific terms: maintaining organic certification, preserving the heritage apple varieties my aunt and I had cultivated, continuing the educational programs we'd started for local schools, and providing fair wages and benefits to the seasonal workers, many of whom had been with us for generations. It wasn't just about money. It was about ensuring that something of the real Meridian Orchards survived, even if I no longer controlled the business itself. Friday brought a new development. Marion called mid-morning. "The Blackwells have requested a meeting," she said. "Not just with their attorneys, but with the family present as well. They're suggesting tomorrow at their Portland offices." "All of us? Why?" I asked. "They're framing it as a chance to resolve the situation amicably. My guess is they want to apply pressure from multiple angles." I considered it. "Will you be there?" "Absolutely," she assured me. "I wouldn't advise meeting them without representation." "Then let's do it," I decided. I have nothing to hide. That evening, I received a text from my mother. "Please don't embarrass us tomorrow. These people are important in the business community." I didn't respond. but the message clarified exactly where her priorities lay. Not with her daughter's inheritance, not with the family legacy, but with appearances and connections. It shouldn't have hurt after everything else, but somehow it still did. Saturday morning arrived with unusual sunshine for late October. I dressed carefully, not in business attire like they might expect, but in what I wore to teach and work the land: dark jeans, boots, a professional but practical button-down, and my grandfather's watch. If they wanted to meet the owner of Meridian Land, they would meet the real me, not some corporate version. The Blackwell Group's Portland office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, the river, and in the distance, the farmland they were so eager to acquire. The contrast wasn't lost on me. These people making decisions about agricultural land from a sterile office. In the sky. Marian met me in the lobby, professional and composed in a tailored suit. "Ready?" she asked simply. I nodded, and we took the elevator up. The conference room was already full when we arrived. My father and mother sat on one side of a long table, both dressed formally. My brother Zach wore what I recognized as his investor meeting outfit, blazer over a t-shirt, trying to balance tech casual with business credibility. Daniel Blackwell sat at the head of the table, flanked by two people I assumed were attorneys. "Ms. Meridian," Daniel stood, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." This time I shook it briefly. "Let's get to the point," I said. We sat, and Daniel cleared his throat. "I understand there's been some confusion about the sale of Meridian Orchards. Our agreement with your father included the business operations and the land they occupy." "There's no confusion on my part," I replied evenly. "My father sold his share of the business, and apparently my share as well, using an outdated power of attorney. However, he did not have the authority to sell my half of the land, which I inherited directly from my aunt." One of the Blackwell attorneys spoke up. "The purchase agreement specifically references the entirety of Meridian Orchards, including all associated property." Marian interjected smoothly. "The purchase agreement can reference whatever it likes, but it cannot transfer ownership of property that the seller did not legally control. Ms. Meridian's ownership of half the land is clearly documented in county records." My father leaned forward, his face tight with anger. "Eliza, you're being obstinate for no reason. The Blackwells made a fair offer for the entire operation." "An offer you accepted without consulting me," I reminded him. "For land that wasn't yours to sell." "Perhaps," Daniel Blackwell suggested, his voice carefully modulated, "we could discuss purchasing your half of the land directly, Ms. Meridian. At a premium over market value, of course." I looked at him directly. "I'm not interested in selling." My mother made a small, distressed sound. "Eliza, be reasonable. Think of what this means for Zach's company." "I've thought about it," I replied. "I've thought about a lot of things this week. About how quickly my half of a family legacy was disposed of. About how easily I was erased from decisions about land I've worked and studied. About how my brother's untested business venture was deemed more valuable than my years of actual contribution." "That's not fair," Zach protested. "Isn't it?" I asked quietly. "When was the last time any of you actually visited the orchards? When was the last time you helped with harvest, or checked the irrigation systems, or talked to the workers who've been with us for decades? I've put my education, my research, my life into that land. And you sold it like it was nothing more than an ATM." The room fell silent for a moment. Daniel Blackwell watched this family drama unfold with the calculated interest of someone looking for leverage. "Perhaps," he suggested finally, "we could discuss a compromise. The Blackwell Group would be open to a long-term lease arrangement for your portion of the land, Ms. Meridian, with generous terms." I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it across the table. "These are my terms for any lease agreement, non-negotiable." He opened it, scanning the document I'd prepared. His eyebrows rose slightly as he read. Maintaining organic certification, preserving heritage varieties, educational programs, worker benefits. He looked up. These would significantly impact our operational efficiency. That's the point, I said. The land stays mine, and it stays true to what Meridian Orchards has always been. Not just a profit center, but a living ecosystem and community resource. This is absurd, my father interjected. You can't dictate how they run their business. I'm not, I corrected him. I'm setting conditions for the use of my land. They're free to accept or decline. Daniel Blackwell studied me with new interest. You're not what I expected, Ms. Meridian. I get that a lot, I replied. May I have time to review these terms with my team? Of course, I said, standing. Marion will handle the communication. But understand this. I won't be pressured, guilt-tripped, or manipulated into giving up what's rightfully mine. Not by my family, and not by your company. As Marion and I turned to leave, my brother called after me. Lizzie, wait. You're throwing away everything. The money, the opportunity, the family peace. For what? Some trees and dirt. I paused at the door, looking back at him, at all of them. That dirt has nourished our family for 4 generations. Those trees put you through college and funded your first 3 failed startups. The land isn't just an asset, Zach. It's a responsibility. One that some of us still take seriously. The elevator doors closed on their stunned faces, and I exhaled slowly. Well, Marion said with the ghost of a smile. That was certainly direct. Too much? I asked. Not at all, she replied. Sometimes clarity is the best strategy. Outside, the October sunshine felt different somehow. Warmer, more present. I hadn't lost everything after all, and what I'd kept might be the most valuable part. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of autumn Sunday that usually filled me with peace. But as I moved around my apartment, watering my collection of houseplants and making coffee, I felt a strange hollowness. The confrontation at the Blackwell offices had been necessary, but it had also confirmed what I'd been trying not to acknowledge. My family had fundamentally betrayed me. I opened my laptop and found an email from Marion, sent late last night. The Blackwells have requested 72 hours to review your terms. Your father called my office 3 times afterward. I didn't answer. I closed the laptop without responding. I needed space to think, to process what had happened and what might come next. I grabbed my hiking boots and a light jacket. The Columbia River Gorge was only an hour away, and the trails always helped clear my head. The Eagle Creek Trail wound through ancient forest, past waterfalls, and along cliffs that dropped hundreds of feet to the rushing water below. I hiked steadily upward, my breath forming small clouds in the cool air. Other hikers passed occasionally, but mostly I was alone, with the sound of my boots on the path and the distant roar of water. About 3 miles in, I reached a viewpoint overlooking the gorge. The Columbia River stretched east and west, a silver ribbon cutting through the landscape. On either side, the forested hills were a patchwork of autumn colors: gold, crimson, russet. Some of those distant patches would be orchards like ours, preparing for the quiet dormancy of winter. I sat on a boulder, pulled out my water bottle, and let myself really feel everything that had happened. The shock of discovering the business had been sold, the casual dismissal of my contributions, the painful recognition that my family valued my brother's ambitions over my dedication, the cold calculation that had led them to use an expired power of attorney to take what wasn't theirs to take. For the first time since that Tuesday in the orchard office, I cried. Not delicate tears, but harsh, racking sobs that bent me double. On that sun-warmed rock. I cried for the betrayal, for the family I thought I had, for the painful clarity of seeing people as they truly were, instead of as I wished them to be. A pair of hikers appeared on the trail, looked at me with concern, and asked if I was all right. I nodded, embarrassed, and they continued tactfully on their way. Their kindness, these strangers, contrasted sharply with my own family's callousness. When the tears finally subsided, I felt emptied, but somehow lighter. The grief wasn't gone, but it had shifted from a sharp, disabling pain to something I could carry, something I could use. I stood, brushed off my pants, and took a deep breath of the crisp air. The view hadn't changed. The river still flowed, the hills still blazed with color. But something in me had solidified. This wasn't just about land or money anymore. It was about standing firm in my own worth when others had tried to discount it. On the hike back down, I started making mental lists. People to talk to, information to gather, options to explore. By the time I reached my car, I had the outline of a plan. Monday morning, I taught my classes as usual, but afterward, instead of heading home, I drove directly to the orchards. Not to the main office where my father worked, or where Daniel Blackwell might now be installed, but to the northern section where the oldest trees grew. This part of the property had been my special project with Aunt Lydia. While my father had focused on the more profitable modern varieties in the southern fields, Lydia and I had preserved and nurtured the heritage apples, Gravensteins, Cox's orange pippins, Newtown pippins, and varieties so rare they barely had names anymore, just stories passed down through generations of orchardists. Miguel, our orchard manager for over 20 years, was supervising the last of the harvest in this section. He saw my car and walked over, wiping his hands on a bandana. "Miss Eliza," he said, his face lighting up. "We didn't expect you today." "I needed to see how the harvest is going," I said, trying to sound normal. Miguel's expression sobered. "We heard about the sale. The new company sent representatives yesterday. They were asking many questions about operations, yields, staffing." "What did you tell them?" He shrugged. "The truth. That this section produces less volume but higher quality. That the heritage varieties require more care but command premium prices from the right buyers." He hesitated. They didn't seem impressed. That didn't surprise me. Companies like Blackwell Group operated on scale and efficiency, not quality and heritage. "Have they mentioned any changes yet?" I asked. Not directly, but they were measuring. The north field, the one with the oldest trees. His eyes held a question he was too polite to ask. "They don't own all the land, Miguel," I said quietly. "My half is still mine, including this section." Relief washed over his weathered face. "That is good news, Miss Eliza. Very good news." I spent the next hour walking the rows with Miguel, discussing the harvest, the health of the trees, the plans for winter pruning. This wasn't just small talk. I was gathering information, documenting the current state of operations before anything could change. As we walked back to my car, Miguel hesitated. "Miss Eliza, the workers are worried. Many families here have been with Meridian for generations. My own father worked these same trees. We've heard stories about what happens when big companies buy orchards." I placed my hand on his arm. "I know, Miguel. I'm doing everything I can to protect this place, and the people who make it what it is." He nodded, understanding the unspoken promise. Before leaving, I drove around the entire property, taking photos with my phone. The trees, the irrigation systems, the processing, barn, the worker housing. I noted the property line markers, the access roads, the creek that ran through the western edge. I needed to know exactly what I was fighting for. On my way back to Portland, I stopped at the small public library in the nearest town. The librarian, Mrs. Keller, had known my family for decades. She smiled when I walked in. "Eliza Meridian, what a lovely surprise." "Hi, Mrs. Keller. I'm doing some research on the history of the valley's orchards. I was wondering if you still keep the old newspaper archives." "Of course, dear. They're all digitized now, but I can help you access them. For the next 2 hours, I scrolled through historical records, newspaper articles, agricultural bulletins, county meeting minutes. I was looking for anything related to Meridian Orchards, to my family's history with the land, to the original purchase by my great-grandfather. What I found was more valuable than I'd expected. Articles from the 1920s describing how James Meridian had pioneered sustainable farming practices decades before they became trendy. Records from the Depression showing how the orchard had employed local families when other businesses were closing. Photos from the 1950s of my grandfather receiving awards for conservation efforts. I saved everything, printing key documents, and emailing others to myself. This wasn't just family lore, it was documented history. The Meridian approach to land stewardship was part of the valley's story. As I was preparing to leave, Mrs. Keller brought over one more file. "I thought you might want to see these," she said. "They're from the Historical Society's collection." Inside were photos I'd never seen before. My great-grandfather standing proudly beside the first small orchard. My grandmother teaching local children about pollination. My Aunt Lydia, decades younger, holding up a prize-winning apple at the county fair. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. "This means more than you know." She patted my hand. The Meridians have always been good stewards, not just of the land, but of the community. Back at my apartment that evening, I spread everything out on my dining table, the photos, documents, printouts, along with the notes I'd taken at the orchard. Together, they told a story that went far beyond business transactions and property deeds. They told the story of a family's covenant with a piece of earth, a promise to care for it, and let it care for others in return. I was so absorbed in organizing the materials that I almost missed the knock at my door. When I opened it, I found my mother standing there looking uncomfortable and out of place. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "May I come in?" she asked, her voice brittle with forced politeness. I stepped aside, letting her enter. She glanced around my apartment with the barely disguised disapproval she always showed for my modest lifestyle choices. "I've been calling you," she said, setting her purse down carefully on my couch. "I've been busy." "Yes, I can see that." Her eyes moved to the dining table covered in papers and photos. "What is all this?" "Research," I said simply. "Family history." She picked up one of the photos, my grandfather standing beside a sign that read, "Meridian Orchards, Stewards of the Land since 1918. "Your father is very upset," she said, setting the photo down. "The Blackwells are threatening to back out of the deal entirely. That would be catastrophic for Zach's funding round." I noted that her concern was still centered on my brother, not on what had been done to me. "The Blackwells knew what they were buying," I replied. "Or they should have, if they did their due diligence. The land ownership records are public." "This isn't like you, Eliza," she said, her voice taking on the wounded tone she'd perfected over the years. "You've always been the reasonable one, the peacemaker. Why are you being so difficult about this?" "Difficult?" I repeated. "Is that what you call it when someone refuses to have their inheritance stolen?" "Nobody stole anything. Your father made a business decision with something that wasn't his to decide about," I cut in, "and neither you nor Dad nor Zach even thought to talk to me first. That's not business, Mom. That's betrayal." She flinched at the word, but quickly recovered. "We did what was best for the family. Zach's company has tremendous potential. The orchard is just an orchard. It's land and trees that have been there for 100 years and will be there for 100 more." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I'd been missing for years. She had never valued the orchard the way I did. To her, it was just a family business, a source of income, not a living legacy. "The orchard is more than that," I said quietly. It's our history, our contribution. It's something real in a world where so much is transient and digital. It's the work of generations. And it's still there, she insisted. The Blackwells aren't going to pave it over. They'll keep running it as an orchard. It won't be the same, I said. You know that. They'll rip out the heritage varieties because they're less profitable. They'll switch to conventional farming methods because they're cheaper. They'll replace the long-term workers with seasonal contractors to cut costs. In 5 years, it won't be Meridian Orchards anymore. It'll just be another corporate agricultural holding. My mother sighed, the sound of someone dealing with an unreasonable child. Sometimes change is necessary, Eliza. You can't hold on to the past forever. This isn't about the past, I countered. It's about the future, about what kind of stewards we choose to be for the things entrusted to us. She stood, gathering her purse. Well, your stubbornness is putting your brother's future at risk. I hope you can live with that. As she reached the door, I asked, Did you know? About the power of attorney, about how Dad was planning to use it. She paused, hand on the doorknob, not looking back. We discussed it. I thought he should talk to you first, but he said it would just complicate things unnecessarily. And you went along with it. He's your father, Eliza. He was doing what he thought was best. After she left, I sat in silence for a long time. The conversation had clarified something important. I wasn't just fighting my father's actions or the Blackwell Group's ambitions. I was pushing against a family dynamic that had been in place my entire life, one where my compliance was expected, where my role was to accommodate everyone else's plans and priorities. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I got up and started writing. Not legal documents or research notes, but a letter to my Aunt Lydia. She had been gone for 2 years, but I needed to sort out my thoughts, and she had always been my best listener. Dear Aunt Lydia, I wrote, they sold the orchard, or they tried to. They didn't realize you had protected me by putting the land in my name. I wrote for hours, pouring out everything. The betrayal, the confrontation, my mother's visit, my fears and doubts, and underneath it all, my determination to honor what Lydia had entrusted to me. When dawn broke, I made coffee and read over what I'd written. The letter had become something more, a manifesto, a declaration of purpose. I saved it, thinking it might serve as a reminder if my resolve wavered in the difficult days ahead. Tuesday brought a response from the Blackwell Group, forwarded by Marion. They were proposing a modified lease agreement that incorporated some, but not all, of my conditions. They would maintain organic certification on my half of the land and preserve a small section of heritage varieties as a demonstration orchard. They offered a generous lease payment but balked at the worker benefit requirements and educational programs. It's a starting point, Marion commented in her email. Better than I expected, honestly. I typed back, not good enough. The heritage section needs to be at least 15 acres, not the 5 they're offering, and the worker benefits are non-negotiable. Later that afternoon, I received a text from my brother. The Blackwells are getting impatient. Dad's freaking out. Can we please talk? I hesitated, then agreed to meet him. Not at our parents' house or his downtown loft, but at a neutral coffee shop near campus. Zach arrived looking harried, his usual tech casual outfit wrinkled as if he'd been wearing it for days. He ordered an elaborate espresso drink and slid into the booth across from me. You look terrible, I observed. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. Yeah, well, I haven't slept much. The Blackwells are threatening to pull their investment in my company if this land issue isn't resolved. That sounds like extortion, I noted. It's business, Lizzie. Everything's connected. Their investment group was going to be the lead in my Series B round. Without them, the whole thing might collapse. I sipped my tea, studying him. Despite everything, I still cared about my brother. We had been close once, before his succession of startups and my academic career had pulled us in different directions. "Tell me about this company of yours," I said. "The one that's worth selling our family heritage for. What does it actually do?" He brightened, always eager to pitch his latest venture. "It's a platform that uses AI to identify promising startup concepts and match them with appropriate investors. We're cutting through the noise of the tech ecosystem, making the whole funding process more efficient." "And you need the Blackwells specifically? There are no other investors?" He shifted uncomfortably. "They're the best fit. They understand agricultural technology, which is one of our focus areas, and they move fast. We need to close this round before the end of the quarter. So this whole thing, selling the orchard, using Dad's expired power of attorney, keeping me in the dark, it was all about timing? About not wanting to complicate things with my input?" Zach at least had the grace to look ashamed. "I didn't know about the power of attorney thing until after the fact. That was Dad's call. But yes, we needed to move quickly. And it didn't occur to anyone that I might have feelings about this? That the orchard means something to me beyond its cash value? Honestly?" He sighed. "We all thought you were just playing farmer, Lizzie. The academic who gets her hands dirty on weekends to feel connected to her roots. Dad always said you'd move on eventually, get a research position somewhere prestigious, leave the actual business to the business people." His words stung, but they also illuminated years of misunderstanding. My family had never taken my commitment to the land seriously. They had seen my work, my literal blood, sweat, and tears poured into that soil, as a hobby, a phase. "That's not who I am," I said quietly. "That's never been who I am. The orchard isn't my hobby, Zach. It's my purpose." He studied me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. "I'm starting to get that," he admitted. "But where does that leave us? The Blackwells won't wait forever." "They'll have to negotiate in good faith," I said. "I'm not trying to destroy your company, Zach, but I won't be steamrolled either. The land is mine, and I have conditions for its use." "What if—" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "What if I could guarantee that your conditions would be met? If I took personal responsibility for ensuring the Blackwells honor the agreement?" I raised an eyebrow. "How would you do that?" "I could take a position on their agricultural advisory board, make it part of our investment agreement. I'd have influence, a seat at the table." The idea was surprising. Zach had never shown any interest in the actual orchard operations before. But there was something appealing about having an ally inside the Blackwell organization, especially one with a financial stake in keeping them honest. "You'd do that?" I asked skeptically. "If it helps resolve this standoff, yes. Look, I still believe in my company. I think it could do real good, help innovative ideas find funding. But I don't want it to come at the expense of destroying our family." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not that everything would magically be fixed, but that at least one family bridge might not be completely burned. "I'll think about it," I promised. "But Zach, this doesn't change what Dad did, or how Mom supported it." "I know," he said, soberly. That's going to take longer to address." We parted with an awkward hug, the kind that acknowledges both distance and the memory of former closeness. That evening, I called Marian and updated her on Zach's proposal. She was cautiously optimistic. It could provide an additional layer of accountability, she agreed. But we'd need to formalize his role in the agreement, make sure it has teeth. "Draft it," I said. "Let's see if the Blackwells are willing to consider it." After we hung up, I returned to my table of documents and photos. Among them was a faded map of the original Meridian property from 1918, showing the careful planning my great-grandfather had put into the orchard layout. The rows oriented to catch the best light, the natural windbreaks preserved, the creek, Access protected. I traced the boundaries with my finger, thinking about how land holds memory, in its soil composition, in the trees that have weathered decades of seasons, in the invisible networks of microorganisms that create a healthy ecosystem. You couldn't just transfer that to a corporate balance sheet. It existed in relationship, in continuity, in care passed from one generation to the next. Whatever happened with the Blackwells and my family, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not break that chain of stewardship. I would find a way to honor what had been entrusted to me, to preserve not just the land itself, but the values it represented. The path ahead was unclear, but the ground beneath my feet was solid. And sometimes, that's enough to take the next step. The next morning arrived with a heavy fog blanketing Portland, the kind that muffled sounds and made the world feel smaller, more intimate. I sat at my kitchen window, watching the mist swirl against the glass, a cup of tea warming my hands. The chaos of the past week had clarified something I'd been avoiding for years, the fundamental disconnect between how my family saw me and who I actually was. My phone buzzed with a text from Marion. Blackwell Group has responded to our counter-proposal. They're interested in Zach's involvement. Meeting scheduled for Thursday, 2 p.m. I texted back a simple, "Thank you," and returned to watching the fog. 2 days to prepare, to strengthen my resolve, to make sure I wouldn't be swayed by pressure or guilt or the simple human desire to end conflict. I spent Wednesday immersed in teaching, grateful for the focus it required. My afternoon seminar on sustainable agricultural practices had never felt more relevant. As I discussed the long-term impacts of different farming methods with my students, I found myself speaking with a new passion, a sharper clarity. The choices we make about land use outlive us, I told them as the class ended. They become our legacy, for better or worse. Something to consider as you move forward in your careers. After class, one of my graduate students, Layla, approached my desk. "Dr. Meridian, is everything okay? You seemed different today." I smiled, touched by her concern. "Just dealing with some family business, Layla. But thank you for asking." She nodded, then hesitated. "I read something about Meridian Orchards being acquired by the Blackwell Group. Is that your family's orchard?" News traveled fast in agricultural circles. "It's complicated," I admitted. "The business was sold, but I still own half the land." Her eyes widened slightly. "The Blackwells have bought 3 farms in the valley where my parents live. 2 of them have already been converted to conventional farming. The other is being replanted with a single high-yield variety." This wasn't surprising, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill through me. "How long did it take, after the acquisition?" "Less than a year," she said. "My dad says the soil erosion is already visible on the hillsides where they removed the windbreaks." I thanked her for the information, making a mental note to research the Blackwells' other acquisitions more thoroughly before tomorrow's meeting. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Miguel, the orchard manager. The subject line simply read, "You should see this." Attached was a photo taken that afternoon at the northern section of the orchard, my section, the heritage varieties. It showed a man in a suit I recognized as one of the Blackwell representatives, standing with a consultant type holding what appeared to be equipment specifications. They were in the midst of the oldest trees, the ones my aunt and I had nursed, back to health after years of neglect. Miguel's message was brief. They were discussing irrigation system replacement and tree spacing. Said it was just preliminary planning. Preliminary planning? On land they didn't own, for changes we hadn't agreed to. I forwarded the email to Marion with a short note. "Documentation for tomorrow's meeting. They're already making plans for my half of the property." Her response came quickly. "This strengthens our position. They're overreaching." I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of bulldozers and chainsaws, of apple trees screaming as they were uprooted. I woke before dawn, my heart pounding and knew I wouldn't sleep again. Instead, I made coffee and opened my laptop, diving into research about the Blackwell Group's previous acquisitions. Layla's story wasn't an isolated incident. In the past 5 years, they had purchased over 20 family farms and orchards across Oregon, Washington, and California. The pattern was consistent. Initial promises to maintain traditions and practices, followed by gradual, then accelerating changes toward industrial-scale production. There were environmental impact reports documenting increased pesticide use on former organic properties, news articles about worker layoffs, community complaints about heavy equipment operating at all hours during modernization phases. I saved everything, organizing it meticulously. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about a pattern of behavior that was changing the agricultural landscape of the entire region. By the time I needed to leave for the meeting, I felt armed, not just with documents and evidence, but with absolute moral clarity. This wasn't a battle between sentiment and progress, as my family wanted to frame it. It was a struggle between short-term profit and long-term stewardship, between extraction and sustainability. Marion met me in the lobby of the Blackwell Group's building, professional as always in a tailored suit, but with a gleam of determination in her eyes. "I've reviewed the revised lease agreement they sent over," she said as we rode the elevator up. "It incorporates many of your conditions, including Zach's oversight role. But there are still issues with the heritage orchard section size and the worker retention guarantees." "Then we keep negotiating," I replied, straightening my shoulders as the elevator doors opened. The conference room was the same as before, but the atmosphere had shifted. My father sat stiffly next to my mother, both avoiding my eyes as I entered. Zach was there too, looking nervous but resolved. Daniel Blackwell rose as we entered, his corporate smile firmly in place. "Ms. Meridian, Ms. Chen, thank you for joining us. I believe we've made significant progress on addressing your concerns." I set my folder of research on the table. "Before we discuss the lease agreement, I'd like to understand why your representatives were surveying my land yesterday, planning changes without my consent." Daniel's smile faltered slightly. "Merely preliminary assessments. Standard procedure. In acquisitions of this nature." "Except half that land isn't yours to assess or modify," I countered. "And won't be unless we reach an agreement that satisfies my conditions." My father cleared his throat. "Eliza, please. The Blackwells have been more than accommodating." I turned to him, keeping my voice level. "Dad, they were planning to replace irrigation systems on land they don't own. Land that legally belongs to me. How is that accommodating?" Before he could respond, I opened my folder and spread out the research I'd compiled. Photos of other Blackwell acquisitions, before and after. Reports documenting their environmental impact. Testimonials from former employees of family farms they'd purchased. "This is the Blackwell Group's actual track record," I said, addressing everyone at the table. "Not their promises, but their actions. Systematic conversion of diverse, sustainable farms into industrial monocultures, worker layoffs, increased chemical use. Is this what you want for Meridian Orchards, Dad? Is this what Aunt Lydia wanted when she left her half to me?" My father looked down at the documents, his face unreadable. My mother glanced at them briefly, then away, as if the reality was too uncomfortable to acknowledge. Daniel Blackwell's professional demeanor hardened. "Ms. Meridian, these materials are selective and misleading. Our agricultural practices are industry standard and fully compliant with all regulations." "Industry standard," I repeated. "That's precisely the problem. Meridian Orchards has never been industry standard. For over 100 years, it's been at the forefront of sustainable practices, community engagement, and worker dignity. Those are the values I'm protecting." Zach leaned forward, surprising me by entering the conversation. "What if we could codify those values explicitly in the agreement? Make them binding, with financial penalties for violations?" Daniel shot him a look, but Zach continued. If I'm going to be involved in oversight, I need teeth. Real authority to ensure compliance. That would significantly constrain our operational flexibility. One of the Blackwell attorneys objected. Yes, I agreed. That's the point. My mother, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. Why are you making this so difficult? Eliza? They're offering good money, fair terms. You could take that money, buy your own land somewhere else if it means so much to you. The room fell quiet. Her words hung in the air, revealing the depth of her misunderstanding. It's not about having just any land, Mom, I said quietly. It's about this land. The land our family has tended for generations. The land that contains our history, our knowledge, our mistakes and successes. You can't just replace that with a check and a new plot somewhere else. To my surprise, I saw something shift in my father's expression. Not agreement exactly, but perhaps the first flicker of understanding. Daniel Blackwell, ever the businessman, sought to regain control of the conversation. Perhaps we should focus on specific terms. The Heritage Orchard section, we can increase it to 10 acres, but 15 is simply not economically viable. 15 acres is approximately what we currently maintain as heritage varieties, I countered. Anything less is a reduction. And the worker protections? Marion prompted. We can guarantee current wages and benefits for existing employees for 1 year, the Blackwell attorney offered. After that, market rates would apply. 3 years minimum, I insisted, with first right of refusal for any new positions created. The negotiations continued for another hour, point by point, condition by condition. I refused to budge on the core issues: the size of the heritage section, the worker protections, the educational programs, the maintenance of organic certification. Eventually, Daniel Blackwell leaned back in his chair. Ms. Meridian, I'll be frank. These conditions would make our investment in Meridian Orchards significantly less profitable than projected. We might need to reconsider the entire acquisition. My father paled. You can't be serious. The sale is already completed. The business sale, yes, Daniel acknowledged. But without access to the full land area under favorable terms, the business operations become problematic. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and preparing for. The point where my stand might actually unravel the entire deal, with all the family conflict that would entail. Zach spoke up again. What if we proposed a phased approach? Full compliance with Eliza's conditions for the first 5 years, then a reassessment based on mutually agreed metrics of sustainability and productivity. I looked at my brother, surprised again by his constructive engagement. That would depend on who determines those metrics, and what happens if they're not met. An independent third party, Zach suggested. Agricultural scientists, maybe from the university, and, if the conditions aren't met, the lease terms remain unchanged for another 5 years. Daniel Blackwell studied Zach with new interest. You're proposing we essentially prove ourselves as responsible stewards before earning more flexible terms. Exactly, Zach confirmed. Show that your modernization can coexist with Meridian's values, rather than replacing them. The room fell silent as everyone considered this compromise. It wasn't perfect from anyone's perspective, but it created a pathway forward that acknowledged both my concerns and the Blackwell's business interests. Marion leaned toward me. It's a workable framework, she murmured. We'd need to carefully define the metrics and third-party evaluation process, but it has potential. I nodded slowly. I could accept that approach, with proper safeguards and clear documentation of the baseline conditions. My father looked relieved, though he remained silent. Daniel Blackwell signaled to his attorneys, who made notes. We'll draft a revised agreement incorporating this phased approach, Daniel said finally. Subject to review by all parties, of course. As the meeting concluded, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Not triumph exactly, but a cautious sense that I'd held my ground where it mattered most. The heritage trees would remain. The workers would be protected. The organic practices would continue, at least for now. And there would be accountability, oversight, consequences for violations. Outside the building, Zach caught up to me as Marion took a phone call a few steps away. "That was unexpected," I said to him. "The phased approach. It was smart." He shrugged, looking both proud and embarrassed. "Tech is all about iterative development, proving concepts before scaling. Seemed like the same principle could apply here." "Thank you," I said sincerely, "for actually listening, for trying to find a solution that respects what I care about." "I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner," he admitted. "I got caught up in my own stuff, in Dad's vision of what success looks like. I forgot that you've been building something valuable too, just in a different way." His acknowledgement meant more than I expected. "Your company really is important to you, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is." His eyes lit up with genuine passion. "I know it probably seems abstract compared to trees and soil, but I believe in connecting good ideas with the resources they need to grow. Not that different from what you do, in a way." I smiled at the comparison. Maybe not. "The thing is," he continued, more serious now, "I don't want success at any cost. Not if it means destroying my relationship with my sister. Not if it means being part of something that goes against values I actually respect, even if I haven't always shown it." I heard Marion ending her call and returning to us. "The attorneys will have a draft to review by Monday," she reported. "Good," I said, "and Zach's going to help review it from the metrics and accountability perspective." She raised an eyebrow but nodded. "A family united front. Wise approach." As we parted ways, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not just the satisfaction of standing my ground, but the first tentative steps toward rebuilding a bridge with at least one family member. Friday morning, I woke to an email notification that made my heart skip. A message from my father. Subject line, "The land." I opened it with trepidation, expecting recriminations or pressure. Instead, I found something entirely different. "Eliza, yesterday made me realize how little I've understood what the orchard truly means to you. Not just as a business or even as a family legacy, but as something you've committed your life and knowledge to. I still believe the sale of the business was necessary for Zach's opportunity, but I was wrong to use the power of attorney without discussing it with you first. That betrayed your trust, and I am sorry. Attached are some photos I found in the attic last night. They show your great-grandfather and grandfather implementing some of the practices you continue today. I thought you might want them for your research. Dad." Attached were scanned images I'd never seen before. My ancestors building the first irrigation channels, planting windbreaks, creating the terraced sections on the hillsides. My eyes filled with tears, not just at the photos themselves, but at this first acknowledgement from my father that my connection to the land was legitimate, valuable, worthy of respect. It wasn't a full reconciliation. There was still hurt to process, trust to rebuild. But it was a beginning. I spent that weekend walking the trails in Forest Park, the enormous urban wilderness that bordered Portland. The autumn colors were at their peak, the maples and oaks blazing against the evergreen backdrop. The earth smelled of decay and renewal, that particular scent that comes when the year is turning, when one cycle ends and another begins. As I hiked, I reflected on what had been lost and what had been preserved. The business arrangement would never be what I'd envisioned, a continuation of family stewardship through my lifetime and beyond. But the core values, the practices, the trees themselves, those would remain under my watchful eye, at least for now. And something new had emerged, a clearer understanding of my own strength, my capacity to stand firm when it mattered most. I had faced the pressure of family expectations, corporate interests, and the path of least resistance, and I had not bent where it truly counted. Near the summit of the trail, I found a fallen log and sat, looking out over the city below and the mountains beyond. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, illuminating everything in sharp relief. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app, beginning to draft a vision for the next 5 years of the Heritage Orchard section, the varieties we'd preserve, the research we'd conduct, the community programs we'd develop. This wasn't just about resistance anymore. It was about creation, about building something meaningful within the constraints I'd fought to establish. There was power in that, not the power of control or domination, but the deeper power of nurturing, of persistence, of care extended through time. On Monday, the revised lease agreement arrived, incorporating the phased approach and most of my conditions. There were still details to negotiate, language to clarify, but the framework honored the core of what I'd been fighting for. Marian called after reviewing it. "It's a solid compromise," she assessed. "They've conceded on the heritage section size, the organic certification, and the worker protections. The metrics for the 5-year evaluation are still vague, but we can tighten those up." "And Zach's oversight role?" "Formally established, with quarterly review authority and the right to bring in outside experts if concerns arise. It has I exhaled slowly. "Then let's move forward. But I want a walkthrough of the property with the Blackwell representatives before anything is signed. I need to document the baseline conditions myself." "I'll arrange it," she promised. The following day, I met Daniel Blackwell and his team at the orchard. It was a clear, crisp morning, the kind that made the fruit trees seem to glow in the autumn light. I brought my camera, a notebook, and my most comprehensive knowledge of every acre. For 4 hours, I walked them through the property, pointing out the special characteristics of each section, the soil amendments we'd developed, the pollinator habitats we'd established, the natural pest management systems we'd implemented. I showed them the worker housing we'd upgraded, the processing barn we'd modernized while preserving its historic structure, the spring-fed irrigation system my grandfather had designed. To their credit, they listened, took notes, asked questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. Daniel Blackwell, in particular, seemed to be seeing the orchard with new eyes. "You've created something remarkable here," he admitted as we stood in the heritage section, surrounded by trees that had been producing fruit since before any of us were born. "It's not just about yield or efficiency. There's integrity to it." "That's exactly the word," I agreed. "Integrity, not just in the moral sense, but in the sense of wholeness, of all the parts working together as they should." He nodded, slowly. "I can't promise we won't make changes to the commercial sections. That's the reality of business. But I better understand now why preserving this part matters so much to you." It wasn't a conversion experience. He was still a businessman focused on profit and growth. But it was an acknowledgement that what I valued had legitimate worth, even if measured differently than on a balance sheet. As we concluded the tour, I stood at the property line between what was now Blackwell land and what remained mine. The division was invisible to the eye, the same soil, the same trees extending in neat rows across an imaginary boundary. But the difference in what those trees represented and who controlled their fate was profound. "We'll respect the terms," Daniel said, extending his hand. "Your brother will help ensure it." I shook his hand firmly. "I'll be watching too. This isn't the end of my involvement. It's just a new chapter." He smiled slightly. "I never doubted that for a moment, Ms. Meridian." As they departed toward the main office, I remained behind, walking slowly through the rows of heritage trees. Gravensteins, Cox's orange pippins, winesaps, Arkansas blacks, varieties that had nearly disappeared from commercial production but still thrived here under my care. I placed my hand on the trunk of the oldest tree, a gnarled giant that had been planted by my great-grandfather himself. Its bark was rough beneath my palm, marked with the scars and healing of over a century of seasons. It had endured drought and flood, frost and heat, neglect and nurture. And it still stood, still bore fruit, still reached toward the sun with stubborn persistence. "We're still here," I whispered to it. "Not exactly as before, but still here." I thought about the generations of my family who had tended this land, not always perfectly, not without mistakes, but with a fundamental respect for the relationship between people and place. That continuity hadn't been broken, just transformed. I would carry it forward in my own way. As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange peace settling over me. The fight wasn't over. There would be ongoing vigilance, negotiations, probably future conflicts with the Blackwells as their business. Priorities inevitably clashed with my stewardship values. But I had established my ground. I had claimed my voice and my power. They had sold my half of the business, but they had forgotten I still owned the land underneath. And in that oversight, they had taught me something invaluable about myself. That I was rooted not just in soil and trees, but in conviction and purpose that couldn't be sold or stolen or dismissed. Some inheritances aren't listed in wills or recorded on deeds. Some legacies live in how we choose to stand our ground, how we refuse to be erased, how we honor what matters most when everything else is stripped away. The orchard would continue. Different, changed, divided, but still bearing fruit, still teaching its quiet lessons about patience and persistence to anyone who cared to listen. And so would I. 6 months passed like the turning of seasons, gradual yet profound in their cumulative change. Winter descended on the Willamette Valley, wrapping the dormant apple trees in frost and occasional snow. The land rested, gathering strength beneath the surface while appearing still to the casual observer. I felt a kinship with this apparent dormancy, outwardly continuing my teaching and research while internally processing all that had happened, growing stronger in ways not immediately visible. The lease agreement with the Blackwell Group had been finalized in November. Marion had ensured every protection possible was embedded in the contract. Specific metrics for soil health, biodiversity, worker retention, and preservation of heritage varieties. Zach's oversight role was clearly defined, with quarterly inspection rights and the authority to bring in independent experts if concerns arose. We had created the strongest safeguards we could within the reality of the business sale. Still, I found myself driving out to the orchards almost every weekend, even in the depths of winter when there was little to see but bare branches against gray skies. I'd walk the boundaries between their land and mine, noting with relief that the dormant pruning on my heritage section was being done with appropriate care, that the winter cover crops we'd always planted were still in place, protecting the soil from erosion. Miguel, still serving as orchard manager, would usually find me during these visits, quietly updating me on operations. "The Blackwells have been consulting me about the spring planning," he told me during a January visit, his breath visible in the cold air. "They ask many questions about why we do things certain ways." "That's good, right?" I asked. "That they're trying to understand our methods?" He nodded cautiously. "So far, they listen more than I expected. Your brother comes often too, asking very specific questions, taking many notes." Zach's engagement had been one of the unexpected positive outcomes of the conflict. True to his word, he had taken his oversight role seriously, educating himself about organic orchard management with the same intensity he brought to his tech ventures. We'd even begun having monthly dinners together, gradually rebuilding our sibling relationship outside the shadow of our parents. My relationship with my father and mother remained more complicated. There had been stilted holiday gatherings, surface-level conversations, careful avoidance of the deeper betrayal that still lay between us. My father had made that first gesture with the historical photos, but full reconciliation would take more time, more acknowledgement of the harm done. As February turned to March, the first signs of life returned to the orchards. Tiny buds appeared on the apple trees, promises of blossoms to come. The cycle continuing despite ownership changes, despite human conflicts, despite everything. It was during this season of renewal that I received an unexpected invitation to speak at the Pacific Northwest Sustainable Agriculture Conference being held in Seattle. The topic they wanted me to address: preserving agricultural heritage in an era of consolidation. I accepted immediately, recognizing the opportunity to share what I'd learned through our family's experience. For the next several weeks, I poured myself into preparing my presentation, gathering data not just from Meridian Orchards, but from family farms across the region facing similar pressures from large agricultural corporations. The conference was held in early April, just as the apple trees back home were bursting into bloom. The meeting room was packed with farmers, researchers, policy advocates, and students, people who understood the value of what was at risk when family farms disappeared into corporate portfolios. I stepped up to the podium, looking out at the sea of attentive faces, and took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I stood at the boundary of the orchard my family has tended for 4 generations and watched as half of it passed into corporate hands, I began. Not by my choice, but despite it. What I've learned since then about power, persistence, and reclamation is what I want to share with you today. For the next 40 minutes, I laid out our story, the sale conducted without my knowledge, the discovery that I still owned the land, the negotiations to protect what mattered most. I didn't vilify the Blackwell Group. Instead, I focused on the systemic pressures driving agricultural consolidation and the creative legal and practical strategies that could help family farms maintain their values even when facing transition. The deed to the land became my voice. When others tried to silence me, I explained. But it wasn't just about legal ownership. It was about recognizing that my connection to that place, my knowledge of its soils, its microclimates, its history, gave me a form of authority that no corporate acquisition could erase. As I concluded, the room erupted in applause, but it was the questions afterward that truly energized me. Farmers from across the region shared similar stories, asked for specific advice, offered their own strategies for resilience. I realized I wasn't alone in this struggle. There was a movement building, people fighting in their own ways to preserve agricultural traditions while adapting to changing realities. After the formal session ended, a small group gathered around me, continuing the conversation with growing excitement. Among them was Elena Cortez, director of the Northwest Agricultural Land Trust. "Your story resonates with so many families we work with," she said. "Would you consider joining one of our advisory committees? We need voices like yours helping shape policy recommendations and educational initiatives." Another participant, James Chen, no relation to Marion, approached with a different proposal. "I run a heritage seed preservation program at Western Washington University. We're launching a new initiative focused on endangered fruit varieties. Your expertise with heritage apples would be invaluable." By the time I left Seattle 2 days later, I had accepted both invitations and collected contact information from a dozen other potential collaborators. What had begun as a personal fight to protect my inheritance was expanding into something larger, a commitment to helping others facing similar challenges, to being part of a collective effort to preserve agricultural diversity and family farming traditions. Back in Portland, I found myself reinvigorated, seeing my situation through new eyes. The partial loss of Meridian Orchards still hurt, but I was beginning to recognize how it had catalyzed a broader purpose I might never have discovered otherwise. This perspective was tested almost immediately. The day after my return, I received an urgent call from Miguel. "Miss Eliza, you should come to the orchard. The Blackwells have brought in consultants. They're talking about changes to the processing facilities." I drove out that afternoon, arriving to find a small group of people with clipboards standing near the historic processing barn. The structure dated back to the 1930s, but had been modernized inside while preserving its distinctive timber frame and character. As I approached, I recognized Daniel Blackwell among them. He turned, not entirely surprised to see me. "Ms. Meridian," he greeted me, "your orchard manager works quickly." "What's happening here?" I asked directly. He gestured to the barn. "We're exploring options for increasing processing capacity. The current facility is charming but inefficient by modern standards." "The barn is historic," I pointed out. "It's part of the character of Meridian Orchards." "And it sits on the business property, not your land," he reminded me, though without hostility. "The lease agreement covers agricultural practices, not buildings." He was right, technically. The processing facilities had always been on what was now Blackwell land. Our agreement focused on orchard management, not infrastructure. I felt a familiar tension rising, the pull between fighting every change and choosing my battles strategically. Before I could respond, another car pulled into the gravel lot, Zach's Tesla, distinctive among the farm vehicles. He joined us quickly, tablet in hand. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic from Portland was terrible." He nodded to me, unsurprised. "Miguel texted you too, huh?" Daniel introduced Zach to the consultants as our agricultural oversight advisor, a title that still sounded strange applied to my tech-focused brother. "We were just discussing the processing facility upgrade options," Daniel explained. Zach nodded, all business. "I've reviewed the preliminary proposals. Before we go further, I'd like to understand how any changes would impact the heritage apple. Processing. Those varieties require different handling than the commercial ones." I looked at my brother with new appreciation. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have known that heritage apples often needed gentler handling during processing, that their varying sizes made standard commercial equipment less suitable. Daniel sighed slightly. "Your sister has similar concerns, I imagine." "Actually," I said, finding my footing, "I recognize that the facility needs modernization, but there are ways to upgrade the interior while preserving the historic structure. It's been done before. My aunt oversaw the last renovation 20 years ago." One of the consultants perked up. "A hybrid approach? That could be interesting. Maintaining the historic exterior while redesigning the workflow inside." "I have the plans from the previous renovation," I offered. "They might provide a useful starting point." Daniel looked between Zach and me, clearly recognizing that we presented a united front on this issue. "We're open to exploring alternatives that meet our efficiency needs while respecting the orchard's character." It wasn't a victory exactly, but it was an acknowledgement that even where they had clear legal right to make changes, they were willing to consider compromises that honored the orchard's heritage. Later, walking with Zach through the heritage section, I broached the subject that had been on my mind since returning from the conference. "I've been thinking about the future," I said. "Not just protecting what we have left, but building something new." "What kind of something?" he asked. "An educational center focused on heritage varieties and sustainable orchard practices, using my half of the land not just for production, but for teaching, for preservation, for research." He considered this, looking out over the rows of trees, just beginning to flower. "You'd need capital? Infrastructure?" "I know. The lease payments from Blackwell help, but not enough for what I'm envisioning." "Have you talked to Dad about it?" I shook my head. "We're still recovering, and I'm not sure he'd understand or support it anyway." Zach was quiet for a moment. "My company's doing well. The second funding round closed last month. I could invest." I stopped walking. "You'd do that?" "It would be a proper investment, not charity," he clarified. "With business terms. But yeah, I would. What you're talking about, preserving these varieties, teaching these methods, that matters. I see that now." His offer touched me deeply, not just for the practical support it represented, but for the respect it demonstrated. I'll put together a proposal, I promised. That evening, sitting at my dining table surrounded by notes from the conference and sketches of what an educational center might look like, I felt a spark of excitement I hadn't experienced since before the orchard sale. This wasn't just about holding on to what was left. It was about creating something new that carried forward the core values in a different form. I worked late into the night, outlining programs, drafting budgets, envisioning buildings that would complement, rather than dominate the landscape. Around midnight, I took a break, making tea and standing at my window overlooking the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Your mother mentioned you spoke at a conference in Seattle. Would like to hear about it sometime." It was a small gesture, tentative, but it represented something I hadn't felt from him in months. Genuine interest in my work, in my path forward. I texted back, "I'm developing plans for an educational center on my half of the land. Could use your perspective on the business model if you're willing." His response came quickly. "I'd be honored to review it." Honored. Not obligated, not reluctantly willing, but honored. The word choice spoke volumes. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity. I balanced my teaching responsibilities with developing the educational center concept, consulting with architects who specialized in sustainable design, meeting with potential program partners from the university and local schools. Zach and I had dinner every Thursday refining the business model. To my surprise, he brought valuable perspectives, ways to make the center financially sustainable beyond just grants and donations, ideas for technology integration that would enhance rather than detract from the hands-on learning experience. In early May, with the apple blossoms fading and tiny fruits beginning to form, I finally felt ready to present my complete vision. I invited my family, my father, mother, and Zach, to dinner at my apartment, the first time we had gathered, there since before the orchard sale. I transformed my small dining space with care. Fresh flowers, good wine, a meal made with ingredients from farmers I'd met at the Seattle conference. The center of the table held something special, a bowl of small misshapen apples preserved from last fall's harvest of a nearly extinct variety my aunt and I had nursed back from a single surviving tree. My father arrived first, surprisingly, punctual, carrying a folder under his arm. He hugged me briefly, still awkward but genuine. "You've been busy," he commented, noting the presentation materials I'd prepared. "I have," I agreed. "It feels good to be building something, not just defending." My mother and Zach arrived together. She brought dessert, an apple tart made from my grandfather's recipe, a peace offering in pastry form. Through dinner, we managed the kind of normal conversation that had eluded us for months, about Zach's company, about my teaching, about local news and family friends. Not deep, but civil, present. After we finished eating, I cleared my throat. "I want to share something with you all. A vision for what comes next." I laid out the plans, the architectural renderings, the program descriptions, the budget projections. An educational center built on my half of the orchard land, dedicated to preserving heritage varieties and teaching sustainable agriculture practices. A place where school children could learn where food comes from, where researchers could study disappearing apple genetics, where farmers could train in organic methods. The Heritage Apple Education Center, I concluded, carrying forward the Meridian legacy in a new way. My mother spoke first. "It's beautiful, Eliza, but can you really fund something like this?" "That's where I come in," Zach said. "I'm making a cornerstone investment, and there's grant funding available for agricultural education. And I've secured 3 university partnerships already," I added. "Plus, the Northwest Agricultural Land Trust is interested in collaborating." My father had been silent throughout the presentation, studying each page with careful attention. Finally, he opened the folder he'd brought. "I had a feeling you might be moving in this direction," he said. "So I took the liberty of researching some potential tax structures." He spread out several documents showing different nonprofit and limited liability options, each annotated with his neat handwriting. He'd been preparing to help, even before seeing the specifics. The realization warmed something in me that had been cold for too long. This one, he indicated one structure, would allow you to maintain control while accessing charitable funding. And this, he pointed to another document, outlines a potential endowment approach that could provide operational stability. You've put a lot of thought into this, I said, genuinely touched. He met my eyes directly. I should have put this much thought into understanding what the orchard meant to you before making decisions about its future. I'm trying to do better now. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a step toward healing. My mother reached across the table, hesitantly touching my hand. You remind me so much of Lydia sometimes. She would have loved this idea. Coming from her, this was significant. My mother and Aunt Lydia had often been at odds, representing different values and priorities within the family. For her to invoke Lydia's memory positively, to connect me to that legacy with approval rather than criticism, it was a profound shift. As the evening progressed, the conversation evolved from presentation to true collaboration. My father suggested refinements to the business model. My mother, whose social connections I'd often undervalued, offered to introduce me to potential donors. Zach brainstormed technology components that could extend the center's reach beyond physical visitors. For the first time since the orchard sale, I felt us functioning as a family again. Not perfectly, not without the undercurrent of past hurts, but with a shared purpose, with respect for each other's contributions. Later, as they prepared to leave, my father lingered behind while my mother and Zach chatted by the door. I've been wanting to tell you something, he said quietly. Watching you fight for your half of the land, seeing how deeply you care about continuing the Meridian legacy, it's made me prouder than I can express. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. Even though I opposed you? Because you opposed me, he corrected. You stood your ground when it mattered, when it would have been easier to give in. That takes a kind of courage I didn't fully appreciate before. He paused. Your great-grandfather would have recognized it, though. He stood against his own father to preserve that land when others wanted to sell it during the Depression. I hadn't known this piece of family history. Really? He nodded. Some things run deeper than we realize. Maybe this center of yours is the next chapter in a story that's been unfolding for generations. After they left, I stood at my window, for a long time, looking out at the city lights but seeing instead the future taking shape in my mind. The educational center rising among the heritage apple trees, children learning the names of varieties that might otherwise disappear. Researchers, documenting agricultural wisdom that deserved to be preserved, a legacy not ended but transformed. The next morning, I drove out to the orchard early. The May sunrise cast long shadows across the rows of trees, their tiny fruits just beginning to swell. I walked to the oldest section, to the gnarled tree my great-grandfather had planted more than a century ago. Touching its rough bark, I thought about what my father had shared. How this land had been fought for before. How standing ground was part of our family inheritance, too, along with the soil and trees. We're not done yet, I whispered to the old tree. There's still work to do here. As if in response, a light breeze stirred the leaves, sunlight flickering through the branches in patterns of light and shadow. I smiled, feeling connected to something larger than myself. Not just family history or agricultural tradition, but the enduring cycle of growth, loss, adaptation, and renewal that defines both nature and human experience. 6 months after, discovering that my parents had sold my half of the business but forgotten I still owned the land underneath, I stood in that same orchard with a completely different perspective. What had begun as a desperate fight to protect what was mine had evolved into a vision for something new, something that honored the past while creating space for future generations to learn, to value, to continue. I hadn't just reclaimed my land. I had reclaimed my voice, my purpose, my place in the continuing story of this place. And in doing so, I had discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed, not just to stand against what I opposed, but to build what I believed in. The business had been sold, yes, but the land remained. And on that land, something new would grow, not despite the loss, but because of it. Sometimes, the ground needs to be cleared before new seeds can take root. Sometimes what appears to be an ending is merely a different beginning. As I walked back to my car, I noticed tiny wildflowers blooming along the orchard edge, resilient, persistent, finding their place in the ecosystem. Not the showiest plants, not the most economically valuable, but essential in their own way, to the health and balance of the whole. I bent down, examining their delicate blooms with the trained eye of a botanist and the appreciative heart of someone who understood their significance. These weren't weeds to be eliminated in pursuit of efficiency. They were integral parts of the living system that made this orchard more than just a fruit factory. That understanding, that recognition of value beyond immediate profit, of relationships beyond transactions, of legacy beyond ownership, that was what I would build into every aspect of the Heritage Apple Education Center. Not as rejection of change or progress, but as insistence that true progress honors what came before, even as it creates what comes next. My phone buzzed with a text from Zach. First investor meeting for the center set for next week. Dad's helping with the presentation. You ready for this? I smiled, typing back. More ready than I've ever been. And I was. Ready to move forward, to build rather than just defend, to transform a painful betrayal into an unexpected opportunity. Ready to show that sometimes, when we're forced to let go of what we thought was ours, we discover something even more valuable waiting to be created. They had sold my half of the business, but they had forgotten I still owned the land underneath. That oversight had become my greatest gift, not just the literal ownership of acres and trees, but the metaphorical ground on which I now stood with newfound clarity, purpose, and strength. Some inheritances can't be sold or transferred. Some legacies live not in deeds or contracts, but in how we choose to honor what matters most. Some foundations, once truly established, cannot be shaken, not by business deals or family conflicts, or corporate interests. I took one last look at the orchard before driving away. Not with the ache of loss that had dominated my visits months before, but with the quiet excitement of creation, of possibility, of transformation. This land had weathered droughts and floods, frosts and heat waves, neglect and renewal. It had seen 4 generations of my family come and go, each leaving their mark, each contributing to its story. Now it was my turn to write the next chapter. Not alone, but with a newfound community of purpose, including family members who were slowly finding their way back to what mattered most. The tiny apples continued to grow on ancient branches, indifferent to ownership documents and corporate transitions, responding only to sun and soil and the attentive care of those who understood their value. In their quiet persistence was a lesson I had finally learned. True ownership isn't about legal documents or business transactions. It's about relationship, commitment, and the courage to stand your ground when what matters most is at stake. They had sold my half of the business, but they had forgotten I still owned the land underneath. And that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.